In this lecture, we're going to look at using the Reconcile 3D node to generate volume rays to this plate. To begin with, we're going to grab a Reconcile 3D node, and it could be, you could find that node under the Transforms menu, under Reconcile 3D. And as you can see, it's got three inputs: an image input, camera, and an axis. So to begin with, we'll just plug our match move camera that we solved for in the earlier lecture. So we'll start with that. We'll plug that in. And then the third input, what we'll do is we're going to generate an axis. It essentially needs an axis and a camera to solve for to generate 2D coordinates for you based on 3D data. So to get an axis, we're just going to grab an axis node. And if we look in our 3D scene, if based on our camera tracker, if you output a point cloud, which we have over here, and if we look at our 3D scene, what we want to do is we want to grab we want to find a point that from the point clouds that's somewhere around here by the bushes to kind of give us this cool volume rays silhouette effect. But we could essentially grab a point cloud anywhere from the scene, but I'm thinking a point around here. So to do that, what we could do in our 3D viewer under the node selection type, if we go to vertex selection, what we could do now is select one of these points. So we could select that point, for example, but you're also welcome to grab any other point out of this scene. But I will grab this point for now. And with our axis node properties up, this coordinate point button right here, if we select that, we could say match selection position, and what that'll do is it'll put this axis node where this vertex is. So if I select this and say match selection position, you could see our axis point dropped in that space, and we have the coordinates of that in x, y, z based on that vertex. So now that we're done selecting that, I'm just going to go back to our normal node selection, and we could go back into 2D space. And now that we've got the coordinates of that axis based on that point cloud, we could plug this into our Reconcile 3D node. And the last input here is an image input. You don't have to plug in your background necessarily in this, but I would recommend plugging in either your footage or a constant node, just to have something in here that's the same resolution as your footage and your scene format, just so that when it generates XY coordinates, it's in the same aspect ratio and resolution as your working scene. So whether you plug in your plate or a constant, it's totally up to you, but it helps to keep things clean by having something plugged in here that's the same resolution. So now that we've got our camera and an axis and our constant plugged in, all we have to do is in the Reconcile 3D node properties, click this Create Keyframes, and you could see we get this frame range dialog box. So it just wants to output keys based on our global timeline, so frames 1 to 100. So I'm just going to hit OK. And there you go. You could see we've got XY coordinates based on that axis that we selected from the point cloud, and it's tracking pretty well. So what we could do now is grab a volume rays node. Excuse me if I could type it, volume rays. And if we plug the volume rays in to our footage, I'm just going to keep this clean a little bit, add a dot. And if we view this now and we look at the alpha channel, you could see we've got this volume rays just based on this default volume center position right here. And what we want to do is link the volume center position to our Reconcile 3D coordinates. So I'm just going to pop this out and go back to our volume rays. And on a Mac, I'm going to do Command and drag. On a PC and Linux, it's Control, but on a Mac, it's Command. So I'm just going to do Command and click and drag, and I'm going to drop this right onto the volume center properties right there. And now you could see we've got our volume rays generating from the same position as our Reconcile 3D. And if we look at our RGB channels, I would definitely recommend playing with the volume raise node. You could adjust the length of the ray, the quality of the ray. You could turn off flickering on this, and you could bring down gain and gamma. So I would recommend experimenting with this, but for the sake of this example, what we're just gonna do is take what we just generated and plus this onto our footage. So I'm going to grab a plus node, plus, and I will apply this to our footage. And you can see now we've got our volume raise on our footage. And if we go to the first frame and kind of do a little playback, you could see we've got the volume raise generating. So we got this silhouette and it's tracking with our footage, which is great. And we could do the same thing by doing a flare. So we could go grab a flare node, and we'll do the same thing where if I pop out our Reconcile 3D and grab our flare node, I will again command drag the position to the flare position, and you can see now our position's over here as well too. So I will close this, and now if we look at our flare node, and we could change this preset. I will go to the preset tab, and we could do a rainbow, for example, and we could plus this on as well. And obviously we could play with the size of this flare. But similar to the volume raise, if we press play, you could see the flare is tracking with our volume raise as well too. And we could have done different thing too here where we got the volume raise from this position, but we could have also grabbed another axis node from our point cloud. Maybe we could have grabbed the point over here and we could have put our flare over here. So we don't have to necessarily link to the same Reconcile 3D node. So there's a lot of handy opportunities to use the Reconcile 3D node for things such as the volume raise or the flare, or you could also use it by applying these XY coordinates to a tracker node, for example. So there's no limitations per se. So yeah, I would definitely experiment with using the Reconcile 3D node for volume raise and flare. There's also a gizmo on Nukepedia that I could provide the link to called Flare Factory that has just a few more presets for the flare, unlike the default flare node in Nuke. So you could change the size of the lens. You could go to some of these other presets, and you could do the same thing where you could link the positions to our Reconcile 3D as well too. So I will provide the link for that, but feel free to experiment with Nuke's default flare node and the volume raise node along with the Reconcile 3D node. Thanks so much.